Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Intel. It looks like a pretty clear investment based off financials and kind of the strong cash flows. But we'll go ahead and take a dive into it today and look a little further into it. So if you're not very familiar, Intel, they're a semiconductor manufacturing that spans multiple segments, industries, everything from kind of cloud computing, personal computing, Bitcoin mining, autonomous vehicles. So a lot of different spaces that they're operating in. And they've recently been going through a pretty big transformation. Let me pull up this slide I made for you guys. And what this is really is just kind of an overview of the company. We'll talk through it real quick, but they've been going through a pretty big transformation. They've hired a new CEO, CCO, CFO, CPO, CGAO, and CPO all in the last year or so. So they've turned over almost all of their top management and brought in kind of new brass to lead the company because the company's kind of stalled per se. And the new CEO, Pat, he has this new strategy that he introduced last year called IDM 2.0. It's going to require significant capital investments, about $50 billion over the next 4 years. And the purpose of this is really to refine their manufacturing capability. So they're going to build out 4 new foundries, 2 in Arizona and 2 in Ohio, along with retrofitting 3 older foundries in New Mexico, Malaysia, and Rio Rancho. So this is all really to significantly expand Intel's manufacturing capacity and to be able to meet demand, provide flexibility on manufacturing, and also drive down manufacturing costs. So with that, let's go ahead and talk through their divisions real quick. I think it's important to understand kind of the different spaces they're playing in before we jump in the DCF, just to kind of understand how well insulated this business is. So first, you have the client computing group. Makes up about 51% of their revenue. This is what you think of when you think of a traditional Intel processor and a personal computer. That is, for the most part, what this client computing group is. The next is the data center group. This is about 33%. This is the processors and semiconductors they're selling for kind of cloud-based solutions. So if you think about like a server, big data warehouse, something like that, they would be using these processors. Internet of Things, this is about 5% of their revenue. You could think of something like a Google Home or the Amazon Alexa. And while, those things don't quite use the same quality of processors, I'd say, as what this Internet of Things is. A lot of this is looking at manufacturing from what I could tell. So like an automobile assembly plant where it has robots and computers. A lot of that might be run by some of these processors, but as kind of smart devices get smarter and need more processing power, right, Intel could be a play there. Mobileye, about 2%. This is really interesting. They bought this company a couple of years ago for about 15 billion, estimated to be worth about 50 billion today. And this is their autonomous driving unit. There's you could probably argue a million different ways, but what I've read is this is kind of the forefront for autonomous level 4 driving. They're kind of the furthest along. They've signed partnerships with Ford and Volkswagen, I believe. And they're thinking about IPOing this. So that's pretty exciting as well. The next thing here is the non-volatile memory solutions group. This is really solid state drive, hard drives, and then programmable solutions group. What this is primarily FPGAs, which is a field programmable semiconductor. So like basically if you buy it and then you can program it yourself in a very specific application. And then ASICs, application specific integrated circuit. This is going to be like their Bitcoin mining, things like that. So now, after talking about these divisions, there's a couple exciting aspects of Intel. First, I think looking at their divisions, these span just about every space of the computing world. I think as the world continues to move to be more connected, Intel's in a great place to be a leader in all of these verticals. Second, let's talk about Mobileye. So they bought them, like I mentioned, for 15 billion. Had a lot of success so far. Signed partnerships with Ford and Volkswagen. They're planning to take Mobileye public, but still retain a majority ownership. So this should create a lot of value in itself for Intel. Right now, current valuations put it at about a $50 billion market cap. I think this is great for Intel investors. It's going to unlock a lot of value. And the EV autonomous driving space is growing crazy. So I think that there's not really any downside to this. So now that we've covered all this, let's go ahead and hop into the DCF and we'll walk through that. So here's the DCF I pulled together. And I guess something I want to note here, the assumptions I actually have baked in come from Intel. So they actually provided this press release back in February 17th, so a little less than a month ago. And this is based off their IDM 2.0 strategy. And I'll link this in the description. But basically they're saying, here's full year 2022 guidance. And then here's longer term. Here's 2023 and 2024. And then here's 2025 and 2026. And this is all based off the investments they're making in those new foundries and their ability to really scale the business. So if we take, the company's word on these assumptions and we apply them into a DCF, that's what this is linked up to. And I think it seems pretty reasonable, right? Low growth in 2022. And something to note here, if you go look at their financials, these numbers won't tie exactly. The reason for that is they actually have an adjusted piece as well, where they remove their NAND memory unit that they recently sold. So they've removed it from historical actual. So from 17 to 21, it's removed. It was about 3 to 4 billion a year in revenue. So if you look at just top line 10K, it's going to look different, but they do have adjusted metrics elsewhere. So this is all adjusted. So looking at that, right, 2%, and then they have low single digits, which I think is kind of in line historically, right? It's been kind of all over the place. And then once all these capital investments kind of happen, they're expecting higher revenue return or revenue growth around 12%. Something to note here is look at the capital expenditures, right? Pretty significant CapEx, 26 billion a year. So they're actually going to be cash flow negative for the next couple of years. I don't think that this is a big deal if we look at their balance sheet. Cash and equivalents, short-term investments, and trading assets. These are all very liquid, basically securities or cash, and that equates to $28 billion in assets. So I think, right, even if they, are losing $4 billion cash a year, they have cash on the balance sheet to cover that, and then it's going to really turbocharge their earnings in the future. So with all of this, and I would argue Intel's a relatively safe company. So I've kind of sensitized from 6 to 10% WACC. The reason I say this is pretty safe, it's they're doing $80 billion of revenue a year, slow growth, kind of basically a blue chip. Not a lot of risk here. Even with their strategy, I don't think it's super risky. It's just building out new manufacturing plants to increase capacity and drive down costs. So I think from that standpoint, not a ton of risk here. Even with that strategy, it's just really taking the time to invest in those facilities. I get valuation from about 170 billion to 620 billion. Now, obviously, you could ignore the 620. Maybe 6% WACC is a little too low. So you could ignore that piece. But realistically, about 250 to $300 billion valuation. They're currently trading at about 200 billion. So, I think that it's a pretty attractive opportunity. Before I would make an investment, something I would look further into, though, is really understanding where they are in kind of the semiconductor space from a architecture and technology standpoint. I know there's a lot of competitors, a lot of different architectures, and are they still kind of the leading the way? Are they not? Have they fallen behind? Can they catch back up? That's the part I'm not as certain about. But based off the model that the company gives us, this is a pretty clear buy. I think Intel's a great company. I think everyone knows what it is. I think the new management brings in a great new set of fresh eyes to really kind of shake things up and grow. So anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and I'll get back to you. Thanks.